I'm in a high tax bracket. So any extra dollar that I make is going to be taxed at that high tax bracket. But if you look at the tax brackets, you don't have to have a high income for that next dollar to be taxed more than your last dollar. It starts at 10%, goes up to 37% at the maximum. And it's not just your whole income is not taxed at 37%, it's in tiers. And so when you make more money in your ordinary income, you're going to be taxed more on that. So then I started thinking, why do I want to put the effort in or to all this work to do these rentals when that money coming in, it really doesn't enrich me any more than I am right now. I'm very satisfied where I'm at. And then it's also getting a huge chunk of it, a third or more taken out of it. Why don't I do something else with that? And that something else was in building equity.
Welcome to Truly Passive Income. I'm Neil Henderson.
And I'm Clint Harris. And today we are joined by Dr. Benjamin Aaker. He's an emergency medicine physician, multifamily syndicator, TED Talk speaker, and author of the book, Your Authority Problem. So Benjamin created what he calls his 50-year plan. During residency, he was aiming to make work optional by age 50, and he actually hit that goal a full decade early. And what makes his approach especially interesting for our audience is his contrarian philosophy of prioritizing equity over cash flow, deliberately deferring passive income to maximize long-term tax-efficient wealth. Benjamin, how are you, sir?
I am doing well. Thank you, Clint and Neil, for having me on the show today. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. We were just talking before we started recording. I love having the opportunity to connect with white coat professionals and physicians because that's the background that I have, and also having that blend of also having the business acumen and being a multifamily operator as well. It's not every day you find that combination. And I think that it really helps with the narrative and bridge the gap because so many people find themselves on one side of that scenario, especially in the physician world. And burnout is very real, especially since COVID. Being administratively top heavy is real. Practicing defensive medicine and having limitations on your choice as a physician is real. And I think optionality and adaptability are really important there. And
so true. I can tell you know your stuff. You've been there,
well,
you know it, and it's such a real thing.
I've seen the downside of that, unfortunately. And I was in the healthcare system going through COVID, and a lot of those issues that were already there were exacerbated. And I love having the opportunity to talk about it and helping people realize that there are options in terms of building an off-ramp from that lifestyle. And the way I like to talk about it is like potentially buying future days off every time you make a passive investment strategy. So when we find that operator that is both, like you are, it always leads to great conversation. So I'd love to get started with you telling us about your medical background and how that worked your way into a commercial real estate investing career.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm an emergency medicine physician. And for those of your listeners who don't know, you go to 4 years of medical school after 4 years of college, and then you go to residency, which is kind of like an apprenticeship. And so emergency medicine, 3 years, I was in Dallas, loved it, but it was hard. And I mean, I think it's hard for anybody going into that. And it's just long hours and you're learning a lot all the time. And this was well before COVID even, but I felt a little bit of, I wouldn't say burnout, but, it was just like, I don't know that I could do that level of work for the rest of the career. And residency is really a lot bigger. And then when you get out into the real world and practice, it's not as many hours, but it's still tough, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know. And I just knew that, I needed to have an off ramp at some point that I could be able to say, okay, this is my, it's my last day, last month, and I'm going to be doing something else. So even in residency, I developed something I called my 50-year plan, which is kind of a silly name because it meant when I turned 50, then I would be financially free to be able to walk away. And that's what, as you said in your very kind introduction, that, 10 years before that, I achieved that now. But I reduced some shifts in the emergency department and found that I still love it. I really wanted to go back. So I've increased my shifts just because I enjoy doing it. But I realized that a lot of your listeners, they have their job, their W-2 job, and they want to have that passive income. And I think if you love what you do for your job, just keep doing it, do that. And I'm really solid in that. And I didn't realize that until much later in life.
We've interviewed a lot of medical professionals on this show, and a recurring theme that I keep hearing is getting to the point of optionality. And that's not unique to medical professionals. I think that's unique to almost anyone who's pursuing some sort of financial freedom. It's like, listen, I'm not aspiring to achieve financial freedom and be able to sit on the beach sipping pina coladas all day, although there's times where that sounds really nice. Um, but at the very least, you're just trying to get to the point where you've got optionality, where you can dial back to fewer hours per week in a job that you already love. Or, if the grind has just gotten too much, you can go off and do something else and take a different tact.
Yeah,
And
it's so
that's not
nice to
so
be able to.
much. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry, go
No,
ahead.
apologize. So yeah, it is nice. That's one thing about being an emergency medicine physician is it's a shift work kind of a thing. So, I'm going into work tomorrow, 12 p.m. to 10 p.m. And I think some people say, well, Friday, 12 to 10, that's horrible, right? Well, but then I have all kinds of time off after doing a few of those shifts to be able to work on whatever I want. I can go golfing. I can work on the real estate. I can, do. And so I just really like being able to schedule those when I want to for the most part.
Yeah, I love that. I think the way that we title it sometimes is freedom of purpose, like independence of purpose. You decide where you want to go, what you want to do. Optionality is a great way to say it. We've run into scenarios over and over where people like hate their job and want to break out of it. And then when they finally find an off ramp from that, they've got to fill that void with something. And a lot of times it's funny that you mention it, but people find out that they actually love what they do, or they remembered what they love about what they do, being a healer, taking care of people, making a difference. And that when you have the choice to go back to that, and it's not a requirement, that sometimes it changes the way that you approach that and your attitude and everything else. And when it's an option for you to go back to that and you remember why you did that in the first place, that it can really make a difference. And especially for physicians, I find that to be a really beautiful thing because one day I was a medical sales rep. And then the next day I took off my scrubs for the last time and I was not. I was just Clint. But you know what you call a doctor the day after their last shift? You call them doctor. They're still a physician, right? They still have that ability. And if they want to use it, there's a lot of different ways that it can be applied. So you never stop being that healer. You never stop having the knowledge base and the information that you've gained from so much time in school and then in practice on patients. And I think that it's really nice to have that optionality of using that, especially like ER is shift work. Use it when you want to, don't when you don't. You can go a little bit more administrative as you get older if you need to kind of get back some of that time for your family. And I love that. I don't think that breaking free from the rat race means that you do go get fat and happy. Hopefully you're pouring into something that's giving back to you, your family, the people in your community as well. And I think that I'm just really glad to hear that that's still what you're doing. At this point in the game, I I really want to hear about your first transition into real estate, how you discovered that, and then what's motivating you these days.
So we moved back from Dallas up here to South Dakota to Sioux Falls to be closer to both of our families, but my wife's family lived around here. And we ended up looking for a house. We had rented for a while, and that was just always, I think, it was just rent. It's easy to move to the next place, and there's a lot of ease into that, and more people are wanting to be renters nowadays, it seems. And we ended up though finding a house that that I wanted, I guess, because it was on 5 acres of land, and I like the open spaces. I'm an outdoorsy guy, and the house was a dump. It was from the 70s. It was just, water would leak in the basement. And my wife just, she just wanted to turn around and walk away when we walked into this place. And but we made a deal that if we would pay that house off, we would then bulldoze it and build her dream home on there. And so I made that deal and we paid it off very quickly because we, practiced a lot of, I think, sound financial things. And we had a high income too, to be honest. And then we ended up buying a house that we were going to rent a house while we built the new house. And our real estate agent that was helping us find rent said, hey, there's this REO property, real estate owned by the bank that needs a little work, but you could just buy this and then sell it when you're done. And so we did that and we put a lot of work in. I'm kind of handy, like to work with my hands. And that's probably why I'm in the ER, but I also do plumbing in real life. And it's just because it's fun. It's a cathartic thing to do. And we repaired that house mostly by ourselves, my wife and I. And then when we went to sell it, that same real estate agent said, I can sell this for you, but I've got two people who are trying to buy a house and they just don't have the credit to do it. And I wonder if you'd be interested in maybe renting to them. And, in retrospect, that saying yes there, which I did, was kind of foolish because we didn't have any kind of background check or anything. We just put them in on the word of them, but they turned into some of our best tenants. And we just realized how great it was to be able to have that income while we did it, while we lived in our new house. And we just had that, they lived in there and they repaired their credit. And about 3 years later, we ended up, this is fast forward into my future, I'm starting to get into multifamily and wanted to downsize on the single families. And we sold them that house. They got a great deal on the house. And we were so satisfied that we helped them go from, poor credit to having great credit to owning their house. I mean, it's the best feeling in the world.
You have a philosophy that I've heard of building equity now and deferring the passive income until later in life when your tax bracket is lower. For someone listening who has heard their whole investing life that cash flow is king, can you walk us through how you think about the timeline of wealth building and why waiting for the income can actually make you wealthier?
Absolutely. It's a tall mountain to climb, that cash flow thing, because, cash is king, right? Cash flow is king. And, if you're in the investing area, that's a lot of times what you're told. And, for me, it was always that I have a high income and, I'm in a high tax bracket. So any extra dollar that I make is going to be taxed at that high tax bracket. But, if you look at the tax brackets, you'll see that you don't have to have a high income for that next dollar to be taxed more than your last dollar. It starts at 10%, goes up to 37% at the maximum. And it's not just, your whole income is not taxed at 37%, it's in tiers. And so when you get more money, you make more money in your ordinary income, you're going to be taxed more on that. So then I started thinking, like, why do I want to put the effort in or to all this work to do these rentals when that money coming in, it really doesn't enrich me any more than I am right now. I'm very satisfied where I'm at. And then it's also getting a huge chunk of it, a third or more taken out of it. Why don't I do something else with that? And that something else was in building equity. And so that's why I call myself Dr. Equity online, because I promote equity and the equity bill. So then when I go on to retire at some point in the future, when I say, gosh, I've got to hang up my white coat and get out of the emergency department, my income will go way down. And so then the extra income that I'm taking out of those properties, which because I'm the investing in the way that I am, it's a active income, treated as active income. And that is going to be at a much lower tax bracket. And I can take that at that time when that income means something to me, that it's something that I really need, and I'm taxed less at it.
So you've done a couple things here, honestly, completely opposite the way that a lot of people preach, right? Everybody's cash flow is king. And the other thing is, there's no right or wrong way, right? Everybody's situation is different. And honestly, most people are too slow to react to what the market is giving us. The universe and the market are changing very, very rapidly. And I think a lot of strategies are not changing fast enough. So a unique way of doing things is not a bad thing, in my opinion. But that's one interesting thing that you mentioned. And the other is that you've done most of the work yourself as a physician. So you're the world's most expensive plumber is basically what you are. Like
I don't know. Plumbers are pretty expensive.
that's true.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, trust me. If it's the plumber in the ER working on your heart, it's a more expensive plumber. The point is, a lot of times we look at these high income earners in the category which you fall in, and it's like, well, why would you go spend your time when it's worth a couple $100 an hour to go do these things that you could pay somebody $50 an hour? And the reality is your answer was the right answer. The right answer is because I like doing it, because it's a challenge, because I want to figure it out. If the answer is, well, it's because I'm cheap or I want to save money or whatever, like that does not scale well. And I would say if you're doing that yourself, you got problems. It probably means your margins were too thin. If you have to do the work yourself, you need to buy better deals so you can afford for somebody else to do it for you. And their time is worth less than your time is. But if it's because you want to learn, if it's because you like the challenge, if it's because you enjoy doing it, great, then do it. Because the reality is the lessons you learn on a single family home are still typically the same lessons that you're going to apply on a 226 unit acquisition in North Dakota, which I know you have under your belt. So you're still learning there and applying that. So talk to me about your first single family rental property that was not for you. How do you make a jump to 226 units in North Dakota?
Took a lot of time, but it does involve other people's money. And so that's a syndication deal. So I've done some of those, and it's a lot of networking and people that I work with in the hospital are investors in these deals. But starting off in the single family realm, I ended up thinking that was the way to go. Bought a bunch of those, and when it was this was it'd be 2016 time frame. So everything's getting more and more expensive and continues there. So, bought those single families. But what was happening is that the margins were going down on that. I'm sure that you've seen this as well. You talk about the 2% rule. That was used to be the thing before I got started. It was a 2% rule. It was a great to have.
The 1% rule.
Yeah, and now it's a 1% rule. And now it's kind of like 0.8 to 0.12%, what might be good. So mindset changes as the market changes, but they just weren't as good. The housing prices have gone up and they've continued to go up. So single family for me became much more difficult because I'm putting in the same amount of work to get less of that margin. And whether it's cash flow or building equity, it's going to be less in that sort of a scheme. So I ended up buying a 8-plex that was on sale in a small town outside of Sioux Falls. So still pretty good value there. And once you get above those 4-plexes, once you get above that small multifamily, then the values can still be there. They're still expensive now, but if you find some value adds, some things that need to have some work done on them, and you do some of that, you kind of manage that work, or you get a property manager to help you do that, then you can still do really well on that. And I bought that 8-plex and just realized the economy of scale of that. You have 8 checks coming in from the tenants as long as they're paying, and you have only one property tax bill. You only have one insurance bill for the same that you would have for that single family. So all that kind of, not all of it, but a lot of that overhead that you spend is much less, and the income is more. And so I did that. And what I do is I set up my mortgages so that they're fairly close to cash flow neutral, which is another important thing that I do to build equity. So I do that so that I'm paying those mortgages, and then rather than getting the income on the property, then it's building that equity. So did that with a 8-plex, and then went to a 16, 2 8-plexes side by side. And that was my first syndication deal. Ended up selling that, and we made a 82% ROI over 2 years on that thing. So we were just like, this is the way to go. And so I've continued. And, when you get to those bigger ones, I mean, that's, unless you have some inheritance or some other way to have millions of dollars in cash, you really need to work together with partners. And so that's where I kind of discovered the syndications, and I was doing that. So then I moved up to bigger and bigger, and now to this 216.
I think syndication works so well in the hospital system, in the medical space, because, the average person may have high school buddies and then college buddies, but most white coat professionals have college buddies, medical school buddies, residency buddies, sometimes fellowship buddies. You have a wide pool of people that traditionally don't have a lot of time. Because you don't have a lot of time, you can't get a lot of experience, but what they do have is capital. And you have to have those 3 things to have success: time, experience, and money. So if you can find a situation where if you have the time and you're building the experience and you have a cohort of people that can help supply the capital, then that's how you put those 3 things together to take on a project where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts and the high tide lifts all ships. So I love that. Or is that still actively what you're doing, or let me rephrase the question this way, actually. You actually have more of a traditional journey than I originally anticipated. Single family homes, small multifamily, a little bit larger multifamily, meaning bringing on partnership, syndication into the triple digit, forced appreciation, renovating, increasing the net operating income, exiting the property. So, and as far as multifamily operators go, you've done a few of these different steps backwards in a very unique and interesting way. But at the end of the day, the story is fairly similar. And one of the things that we hear over and over, and you said it, is that you thought single family homes was the way. I think we all have had so many steps in our career that we thought this is a destination, and that quote unquote strategy turns out just to be a stepping stone. Right. I was doing the same thing. I bought small quadplexes that I converted to short-term rentals and Airbnbs because you make that little change. But the reason that those deals work is the unit density that you talked about. If I bought 4 condos, it would maybe break even. But one quadplex is 4 tenants, 4 income streams, 1 set of taxes, 1 set of utilities, 1 mortgage. So that unit density of 1 set of fixed overhead, but 4 tenants really spreads out your risk. And then you go to 8 units, 16 and 226. That obviously just it changes and it becomes safer as long as you've done your math right up front. But a lot of times you start one of those strategies thinking this is the way. This is the destination. This is what I'm doing. This is the way I'm going. And then you circle back and you talk to that person 2 to 3 years later, they're doing something else. And what you realize is that quote unquote destination is usually just a stepping stone on to the next thing. So where are you at right now with your investing? What do you really like? What are you staying away from? Where's the opportunity?
Yeah, I like how you say that. You got to be flexible, and then and times change, and people change, and the market changes, and you've got to be able to adapt to that, and maybe you find something that you like better. But I still am actively looking for large multifamily, looking for that, looking for the next purchase. It's been a couple of years since I did one. My goal had been to do one every year, but I don't want to kind of shove one through that is not a good one. So I take the time to research them, and most of them I end up giving a thumbs down, and I go on to the next one. And I do that because all of the people that are with me, my partners in these deals, and when I say partners, I'm talking about LPs and GPs, but mainly LPs who are my friends. They're my coworkers. They're people that trust me and I trust them. I know them well. You know, it's a little bit different when it's somebody that you know. I mean, I know you've said before on this podcast that it's a lot harder to lose someone else's money than your own. Totally agree with that. Absolutely, 100%. That you, wow, losing your own money seems like a punch in the gut, but man, to lose somebody else's, luckily I haven't done it. And sometimes it's going to happen, and you prepare them for it. You write all these documents and whatever, but you never want it to happen. You do everything you can to stop it. So it's just a little bit more when it's somebody that you know and somebody that you like, and that they have really put their trust in you. Not maybe, I mean, financial trust you get in any syndication, right? Or they wouldn't be paying money, or investing money. But there's a little bit more trust when it's a friend or a coworker or a colleague that you're going to be working with. So I still, and those are the people that I seek and I network with to try to work with them. I've accepted other people in, but I have to get to know them really well. So I want to do more of that. So a lot of it is networking. Thank you for the invitation to be on the podcast, getting the word out there about what I do. And it's very different, as you've said, from others, that it is looking at equity. So they're structured not like your typical syndication where they promise, hey, you're going to every year or every quarter, you're going to get a check for this much. I don't promise that, because the people that invest with me, they don't need that. Honestly, they don't want that. I mean, you'd love to have it, right? It'd be great. I'm not going to turn it down, but I want that in the future, not now.
Well, listen, I think if you were going to sit out a couple years, the last couple years in multifamily are the ones you want to sit out. Right? The when the interest rates on variable rate debt
Horrible.
shot up in November of 2022, they shot up 2,800% higher and faster than it ever has in history. And everybody still had recency bias on the price that they wanted for their property that they could have gotten in 2020 and 2021. They still want that price, but the cost of the debt went through the roof because of the interest rate increase. If you're ever going to sit a time out, the last couple of years in multifamily was a good time to do it. So good job having that discipline. I do want to talk about uh, something negative that happened to you where, I know you talked about a syndication. I don't know if it was yours or another one where you had occupancy that dropped by like 75% because there was a nonprofit that pulled the subsidies from the tenants. And you talked about after that, you were lying awake staring at the ceiling, solving all the world's problems like I often do at 3 a.m. And you had some thoughts that you ended up writing down that eventually turned into your book, which I'm assuming you're talking about your book, Your Authority Problem. I'd love
Yes.
to make a transition. Tell me about what happened with that situation. And then tell me about your thought process and how it turned into a book. And then I'd love to hear more about what my authority problem is.
There is something terrible about waking up at 3 a.m. and having the first thing you think about being whatever badness in your life. And for me at the time, it was this syndication. That was my first one that I ever did. a lot of friends involved in that one. And, I found this, this is the two eightplexes side by side that I mentioned. And it was owned by a nonprofit, and they subsidized. So what they do is they get government funding, and they will subsidize people who maybe wouldn't qualify for renting at other places. So they're a little bit down on their luck for various reasons. So they would get them in, and then they subsidize their rent. So out of one hand, they then will pay their other hand the rent as the landlord. And I think this nonprofit, after buying a few different places, they kind of thought maybe we don't want to be landlords anymore. It's not really our mission. I don't know that that was for sure, but I think that was the case. So they started selling. And so it was a really good deal on paper. In terms of the, what's the income was and looking at all the metrics, this is the thing. And it was enough that I could have bought it myself, but I knew that I wanted to go to the next level. So I wanted to have knowledge on how to do a syndication. So told all the investors, hey, I'd like to bring you in on this. And this first time I'm doing this, we'll see. And they said, yep, we'll be involved. And, it would be great, because it seemed great to just be able to get that check from the one person every month, or one entity, which is that nonprofit, just get the check and you got your tenants in there. What a great thing. And so a couple months after we bought the place, they started to dump people off of their subsidy program. And they just had various reasons and, fine print kind of things that they're making too much money now and whatever. They're off. It's just one after another just getting dropped off. And we got down to 25% occupancy. And that was what, and it wasn't losing my money. I just, like, for the whole thing, I thought, I should not have done this. I should not have done this. I should have just, if I would have done it, it should have been just with my own money. This would be nothing. I'd just walk away and, work extra shifts in the ER. But with other people's money, it just was another level of pain and woke me up at night. I could not get back to sleep. And somebody just gave me advice on that was, you should, when you wake up at night thinking thoughts in your head, write it down. So I got a notebook, and I still have it to this day at the side of my bed. And if I wake up in the middle of the night, I write it down. And so those thoughts that I wrote down ended up becoming the impetus for that book, which is about giving authority to other people to judge you, to make decisions, which in some cases you should do that. Like if you are driving down the road and speeding, you should give authority to the police officer to judge you as speeding. But in sometimes that's not. And when you are feeling bad about yourself for whatever that you think that you did, you're in your mind, you are projecting on them that judgment of you that's probably incorrect, and it brings you down. It wakes you up at night, and it's horrible. So with this deal, I started writing this book, and I'm working on this deal. Luckily, I had raised extra money to do a renovation of a garage that had the garage that they were using as a thrift store before I bought it. And I was going to turn that into 4 garage spaces and rent those out. What a great idea for a value add. I ended up not doing it because that money became the mortgage payment.
Yeah, rescue money. Yeah.
And so then, long story short, we have another property. My wife and I happen to own a small motel that she runs. She likes doing that. And she had a contractor that was building large buildings out here in South Dakota. We have large animal buildings for animals, for farms, needed to have 10 motel units, and we only had 4 there. And she said, but sorry, we don't have this, but we do have this property that is in town. It's got all these vacancies. Maybe you'd like to rent that. So I wanted to rent all 10, and I could have, but I told him I'd only rent 5. And the reason was that I didn't want to have 10 units rented to this contractor that then when they're done, they just all be gone and be back to the same place. So I rented 5. And then on the day before I had to get them in there, the sewer backed up, and this was a weekend. And so I had to get down in there. I called plumbers. This was right during COVID. And as you said, Neil, just plumbers can't find them. You could pay thousands of dollars, and I would have in the time. I could not get somebody to come out there. So I went out there myself with a jackhammer, and I dug up that cement floor, and I put in a new pipe down there myself on a Saturday. I poured cement that night. On Sunday, I put the sticky tile down, and then on Monday it was rented, and I had to work in the ER, washed my hands, took a shower, and like that was just like, why, But that's another reason. It's not just because I love doing that. I didn't love doing that at the time, but it was about necessity. And I'm glad that I had that knowledge to be able to do that.
Real
Yeah.
estate's fun. We're having fun, right?
Yeah.
Listen,
Syndicate, they said. This will
This
be
is fun.
something.
This is fun.
Benjamin, you make a point. Listen, when it's your money, it's one thing. When other people's money is at risk, that is when you start wondering about, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And like, we haven't lost investor money either. But you're right. It's a different, heavy lies the crown. Heavy lies the crown when you're the one making the decisions and you're responsible for that. It's not just the weight of the money. It's the relationships. It's the trust. It's the belief in what you're doing and your ability to execute the decision. And those people don't always see what the market is throwing at you. It's challenging. But that's the tough part that I don't think enough people think about before they raise money. When people are talking about raising money, all they think about is the deals that they're going to do, the scale they're going to have, and the growth that they're going to have. But I think that you have to realize that you're signing up for a partnership. It's a marriage that you are signing up for a period of time. And you have to put that person's needs ahead of you. And if you're doing it right, it does weigh heavy on you. And it's something that, there's probably nothing in the world that would have made you go run a jackhammer on that Saturday if it was your money. But once other people are involved, then heavy lies the crown,
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a tough time in multifamily right now, and there's a lot of multifamily syndicators that the news is not great. I mean, I've seen some really high profile multifamily syndicators, um, you know, admit to some pretty horrific losses lately,
Yeah.
and I'm curious how you navigated communicating that bad news to investors, and you didn't lost anybody's money, but it is hard, when things, the cliche goes, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy, and I would say no pro forma survives contact with a real estate market. I mean, we all have pro formas. We're telling people, hey, here's our thesis, here's what we think's going to happen, and I don't think I'm not an LP in a deal that's gone exactly to performa, and I'm not in a GP that's gone exactly to performa. And I'm curious how you approached having those conversations with the people who are not just your LPs, but they're also your friends and colleagues.
Well, this is something I learned from the medical field, and it's about setting expectations. So, you're going to put a pacemaker in a patient, and you need to talk to them before. Sit down, actually have a talk, answer their questions, and what are your expectations? You may not say it exactly that way, but what do you hope to get out of this? What level of you're going to run a marathon after this, and maybe they expect that. Well, it's a good thing we asked the question, because we don't want you to run the marathon with your new pacemaker. So, this is going to help you do whatever, activities of daily living and help you do your normal things. And it's the same thing, but just in a financial terms. With when you sit down, you need to have one-on-ones with the people that are your partners and talk to them about what is it that you want to gain? What are you looking for? And if they say, well, I want to have, quarterly paychecks from this, then I say, well, maybe you want to go to a different place because they're a different investing firm, because this is not, our plan is not to do that. And so I think that having that strategy to talk to people up front, talk to them about, here are the things that might happen, no crystal balls, just that, the market might take a downturn, and look at what has happened. The rents are not going up like as was expected. But if you plan that in advance, you're, like you say, pro forma, it's not going to survive. We like to have a worst case scenario, a middle scenario, and a best case scenario that we present to the investors. And we're shooting for that best case scenario, but might not make it. And I think if they know that in advance, that helps. But once I've lost money to investors, hopefully that never happens. I plan on it never happening. Then I'll know a little bit more about what that feels like, and I might be able to say, great. It was great that I talked to people all about this in advance, but I think when you lose someone's money, you are doing everything you can to make it right, or to not have that loss. So if you set those expectations in advance, I think that helps. And if you have a plan for what's going to happen when it's bad. And so that's what we have right now going on. Rents aren't going up as we liked, but they're still holding steady. We're able to keep that going. And if I had promised, you're going to get a certain, you're getting 10% every quarter or every year, but you're getting, 2.5% quarterly. that's the first thing to go, right? When these things are starting to go south. So those things start to go and they say, it's bad. It did not work. But the investors say, well, you promised, you said that, I signed up here hoping for that kind of income. And if you've done that, I think you've already set yourself on the wrong foot at the start. Not to say that those kind of syndications are bad by any means, but they're harder to work. They're harder to keep long term, I think.
Well, I think it's great that you started with people where you already had trust established ahead of time. I think that gives a lot of people tend to give grace to that when they're betting on the jockey and not the horse. It's not just a deal that came through their inbox. They're like, this looks good. Let me invest. They're investing with you for a reason, for a purpose. And so I think because of that, there's probably a longer leash and they're going to give grace to the project because they know you're a good person trying to do it for the right reasons. Um, One of the things that there's a little bit of a shift here. I've heard just a funny anecdote. If you ever go into a blood drive and you're giving blood, you want to line up behind the oldest, most seasoned looking nurse that you can find because they're going to get that stick right the first time. You're going to be in and out of there, right? It's going to be a lot less painless than a student poking around. And obviously, it's a little tongue in cheek, but the reality is the reason they call it practice is because physicians start off learning a lot, fellowship, residency, and the longer you go in your career, you're always learning. You're always gaining knowledge in everything that you do. Most physicians are lifelong learners. And that's why I love that you put a lot of what you learned into a book. I love that the lessons that created that book came out of some hard times and some late nights. And because that's the value, right? That's what we want. Everybody can talk about the good stuff. We want to talk about those landmines that you don't see that you're trying to avoid, right? That's where we really learn. And I know that you're continuing to take what you're learning and putting it out there. So I know you've got a blog post. Tell me about your blog post. What's going into that? What is the information, the content that you're putting out?
Yeah, I do a blog called drequity.com, and it is about real estate investing first, but I bring in stories and things that I've learned from the medical field into that. A lot of it is for people who are just wanting to get started as real estate investors. They might want to be active and own their own properties, and there's a lot of things on that for them. There's some things about syndications and how it works. It's, vetting syndicators and things. Not really doing it as a way to get investors because I don't really get to know the people that read the blog as much, but maybe some point in the future I will. But it's really more of an educational thing. I'm an educator too. I teach medical students, and most physicians do teach, and I really like doing that. And in the real estate realm, I think I have a lot now after 15 years of doing this to be able to teach people. So that's why I have that blog. And it's all about, starting from the very basics and learning about how to invest.
I love that. Well, listen, unfortunately, we got to start landing the plane here. There's a lot more I would love to talk to you about, but we got to start wrapping it up here. Before we do, I want to ask you a question that we ask all of our guests. And we used to just ask, like, what's your favorite business book, favorite real estate book? But the reality is you deal with a lot of people at the hospital and in the healthcare community that don't have exposure to the type of real estate investing that you're bringing to the table. So when you're talking to family, friends, and colleagues, and people are interested in what you're doing and learning, and the answer may be your blog, and that's okay if it is, but the reality is, as those people are coming to you and asking these questions, a lot of times it's hard to give them an answer because it's so much. Like, how do you just dip a toe into this whole other world of alternative investment strategies? When people approach you, is there a single resource, book, podcast, anything like that that you find yourself recommending to those friends and family more than any other for them to self-educate?
I recommend the Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Keller and Papazan. Now that it's not a syndication book, but what it does is it teaches you how to, for like the first 2/3 of it is kind of a mindset book, which I think is really important for people who are just kind of, like you say, dipping the toes in the water. Like, what is this all about? And then the final third, I tell them, if you're interested after that, read the final third, which is about underwriting deals. And so if you know how to do that, it's going to then give you a lot of information about how to understand what information I'm giving you when I give this information to you.
Thank you for recommending that one. So many, we get the Purple Bible getting recommended all the time.
Meaning
And
Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
Rich Dad, Poor
Yeah.
Dad, and
I
listen,
read it. It's good.
so many of us, found our way into real estate probably by reading that book. And I always say, look, it's a great starting place. It's just it's a mindset book. But I love the book that you recommended, because it's the mindset plus some of the tactical advice of actually because Kiyosaki doesn't do that at all.
Right.
Truth be told, Kiyosaki wrote that book to basically sell his courses where he would then teach you how to do it for a price. So I love that book recommendation. I think it's the first time anybody's ever recommended it.
I think so. We've talked about that book, but I think literally you're going to shoot me down on this. I don't know where we are. We're 160, 155, 160 episodes
I
in.
love your optimism. We just had 150.
150. See, I'm close.
Congratulations on that.
97%. So I think that's the first time that's come up as an actual suggestion. We've talked about it before, but that was a great suggestion. So great. We'll leave it there. Again, I think I know the answer to this question, but Dr. Benjamin Aaker, I appreciate you being here. Thank you for sharing your background as an emergency medical physician, as an author, as a syndicator. If any of our listeners want to find out more about you, follow you, or keep up with what you're up to, where would be the best place for them to go to do that?
Best place is drequity.com, all one word.
Is it drequity.com?
So, yeah, DOCTOR. That's a very good question. I should get that reserved. Somebody probably will for me.
Exactly. Yeah.
DOCTOR equity.com. Very good. Gotcha. All right, sir. Thank you much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Clinton, Neil, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Love to be back sometime.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much for listening and watching the Truly Passive Income podcast. If you liked the show, if you think it would be useful for someone else, the greatest compliment that you could give us would be to share the episode. Leave a comment down below or leave us an honest review. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let us know down below. And remember, with truly passive income comes freedom of time, place, and the freedom to pursue your higher purpose.